Thunderstorms of Eden, chapters 6 and 7. Genocide is the language. Cambodia, 1975 onward. Genocide is the language of smoke. Embers die down, yet continue to smolder through the occasional stroking, just enough to keep the fires burning. As it turned out, too many had already been extinguished in a rain of blood. There was endless proselytizing on the new way, a way of thinking that required no thought, a world of complete obedience and thoughtlessness. Where have we heard that? New slogans to mold the masses into an unsustainable lifestyle. Compliance was governed by child soldiers, dressed in black with machetes and AK-47s, patrolling endless rice fields of hollow-eyed hunger. There was no opportunity for laughter or even irony, without the threat of being shot or casually killed. No photos or mementos were allowed. No luxuries of any kind. Kelong and his family endured the protracted meetings that would indoctrinate them to this new way, Pol Pot's way of unquestionable servitude to the Khmer Rouge. America was the enemy, a society that thought too much about too many things, had too many freedoms. Communism was a better solution to any sort of westernized civilization. The exhausting days soon turned into exhausting months, and for those who had not yet perished, into years. You received a couple of tablespoons of runny rice once a day, if you were lucky. If you got transferred or were fortunate enough to be injured and not disposed of, you might get a better meal somewhere else. Children were instructed to spy and report on their parents, should they demonstrate the slightest deviation from the way. That sounds familiar. China's gaping jaws consumed all that was Cambodia. China's genocide would eventually be compared to Cambodia's, but 20 times worse, with over 45 million deaths from 1958 to 1962. Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward has been hailed as one of the greatest disasters since the Holocaust, and Pol Pot was following suit by allowing all the rice fields of Cambodia to slide down the barrel of the communist machine. Mao had all but starved much of his own population. It's a thing, you guys. And now, years later, needed someone else to subsidize his vision. The first fatality in Kelong's family was his brother-in-law, Chip, who was executed once the Khmer Rouge discovered he was an ex-army soldier of the old regime. He had been ordered onto a bus and told that he, along with other ex-military police, was going to greet the king. They would be rebuilding the new Cambodia. He never returned. On an innocuous day in 1976, Kelong was called into the local commander's hut. He was told in the most matter-of-fact way that his father had died. When Kelong inquired about funeral services, Commander Mok went on to say that Kelong would not need to go to the burial because he did not possess the magical power to bring his father back to life. Within a few months, Kelong was informed, while working in the fields, that his sister, Ali, and nephew, Chenda, were now gone. Kelong remembered the last time he had seen Ali. She was just 11 years old. Too much deprivation had caused her stomach to become bloated and distended. Her ribcage now appeared fossilized, barely concealed by a tattered sarong. Contact was forbidden between them, but despite a potentially fatal outcome, one day Kalong followed her to the local well. From a distance, she managed a broken smile for him, and they drifted apart. He didn't realize it would be the last time he would see her. He was advised by the ever-present cold breath of the Khmer Rouge that everyone else was alive, so there was no need to interrupt his work to visit his family and mourn these deaths. Where have we heard that before? No empathy. Soon his grandmother perished. This time he managed to bury her in a communal grave. Soon after, he was told that his mother had passed on. This final blow drove a starving 16-year-old into an incomprehensible state of grief. Altogether, 50 of Kilong's extended family lay amongst the scattered graves of the 2 million odd souls that made up the contours of a place known as the Killing Fields. The Church of Scientology, American St. Hill Organization, Los Angeles, Temple Street. Do you have an open mind? Yes. We don't accept people who say yes. Do you have an open mind? No, then. That was my first ever interview question. I was now 16 years old, and my pleas to be sent back to my father were ignored. Where was her father? I had been perpetually stalked by the church recruiters to join the Sea Organization for 1 billion years. Since the church believes in reincarnation, the expectation is that when you die, you will find your way back to the Sea Organization. Not that the 1 billion-year contract could ever be binding, since I was a minor, but you are led to believe you will be subject to eternal damnation by breaking it. There is nothing more important than saving the planet, and you are fed all kinds of sexy hype about how great it will be in the Sea Org, along with inferences that you're a traitor by saying no. It's a guilt, you guys. The guilt Scientology imposes is so great, it's a wonder the Catholic Church hasn't done a study to see where they can improve on theirs. After a couple of years of being in limbo and unsuccessful tirades, I was in both an abandoned and incarcerated state. I knew little of the outside world, since nothing much happened to me beyond church-related activity or business. I don't recall seeing butterflies, only flies and cockroaches. It also didn't occur to me that the constant reinforcement of a dogmatic ideology would eventually form an emotional makeup no different than that of a suicide bomber. It would be familiar, for one, being trained by the ISIS, with their slow indoctrination and normalization of violence, the isolation and manipulation of a young mind being validated by a peer group, the constant reinforcement that you're special. It's a love bombing, you guys. And everyone outside of radical Islam is an infidel. The sense that dying for a cause means you will find a special place in heaven. I suspect I would have strapped on a vest full of C4 and blanked myself and others to smithereens if the situation warranted it, especially if everyone else around me were reinforcing the same ideology. But that's not how it happens in the Sea Org, since we had no weapons to go with those uniforms. And I doubt ISIS-type behavior would be allowed in the United States or any other civilized country. In my case, and too many others, it was my mind that would be blown blank with little or no collateral damage to those around me. And I never had a high school chemistry class, so pyrotechnics never entered into the equation. It didn't take much arm twisting for my mother to offload me into the Sea Organization, The Scientology services were expensive, but there was child support, and now the proceeds from the sale of the house in Colville that she could reinvest into church services without the burden of a teenager. The church would cover all my room and board. She was certainly doing her bit by handing over her daughter to the cause. Sacrifice, you guys. Things shouldn't have worked out better for everyone except, of course, for me. Soon my sister also decided to join. I'm not sure of her motivation, but it probably had to do with the same badgering from the recruiters. After I completed my entry interview into the Sea organization to ensure I was suitably closed-minded, this was my mother's response to the recruiters. Can you make sure she finishes high school? Yes, we'll make sure that happens. Since I was an adult in their eyes, I, of course, had the capacity to oversee my own decision-making. What it really came down to is that I really believed I had no other option. I also did not realize that the exhausting work demands to which Sea Org members were subjected were a manipulation of a constitutional right covered under the ministerial exemption. Normal labor laws did not apply. The church could work us as long and as hard as they liked, technically without repercussions. That piece of information wasn't covered in the marketing hype, and the American taxpayer gets to subsidize all this under the 501c3 religious exemption law. And I got to be a chain-smoking, foul-mouthed dropout. Add to the mix the siphoning of my father's modest teacher's pay toward the dehumanization of two of his children, who had the misfortune of entering the event horizon of L. Ron Hubbard's insatiable black hole. It is a place that too many never really return from, a place where the indignities have no expiration date. From the beginning, nothing turned out how I had thought it would, only got much worse, much like the stifling air and crumbling facades of buildings and people. Thus began my spiritual decay and subsequent brain freeze that would haunt me for a lifetime. Lambs to the slaughter. #.